Rude billionaire's wife humiliated poor black maid in front of her husband and dragged her out of his car. The screech of brakes cut through the humid Atlanta evening as Sabria Matthews was dragged from the black Mercedes like a rag doll, her knees scraping against the hot asphalt of the Buckhead Mansion's circular driveway. The designer heels that had just kicked her legs out from under her clicked menacingly on the pavement as Mrs. Callista Blackwell stood over her, blonde hair wild with rage, diamond wedding ring catching the last rays of Georgia sunlight. "Get your filthy hands off what belongs to me." Callista's voice pierced the evening air, loud enough to echo off the towering columns of the antebellum-style mansion, loud enough for the neighbors in their million-dollar estates to hear every venomous word. Sabria's palms burned where they'd hit the ground, gravel embedded in her dark skin, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation burning through her chest. Around them, the manicured lawns of Atlanta's most exclusive neighborhood stretched like green judgment, witnesses to her shame. Spanish moss hung from ancient oak trees like funeral shrouds, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed 7 o'clock, the same bells that had rung when her mother died giving birth to her 25 years ago in a rundown clinic on the other side of this very city. "Callista, for God's sake," Cashin Blackwell's voice cracked as he stepped out of the driver's seat, his usually perfect composure shattered. His hand shook as he reached toward Sabria, then stopped, caught between his wife's fury and something that looked dangerously like conscience. "Don't you dare defend her." Callista whirled on him, her face twisted with something beyond anger, something raw and desperate and terrifying. "I saw how you looked at her in that car. I saw how she looked at you." The accusation hung in the thick southern air like poison. Sabria struggled to her feet, her uniform torn at the shoulder, feeling the weight of every terrible moment that had led her here, from the foster homes in East Atlanta where she'd learned to make herself invisible, to the minimum wage jobs that barely kept her alive, to this mansion where she'd thought she'd finally found stability. Where she'd been so wrong. We weren't," Sabria's voice broke, the words dissolving into something between a whisper and a sob. But even as she spoke, she knew the truth didn't matter. In Callista's world, perception was reality, and the perception was damning. Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back to another incredible story that will absolutely blow your mind. I can already feel the energy from wherever you're watching, whether you're cozy at home, commuting, or taking a break from your day. How are you doing today? Please, drop in the comment section where you're watching from. And hey, if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, do me a huge favor and smash it right now because trust me, you're going to want to see how this story unfolds. And tomorrow, I have also created something very special just for you, another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Once again, welcome to Mr. Paul's Stories, where we come together like old friends, wrapped in the warmth of stories that light up our souls. Now, let's continue today's story. A black SUV pulled through the mansion's gates, the evening shift security guard making his rounds. His headlights swept across the scene like a spotlight on a stage, the billionaire's wife standing triumphant, the billionaire himself frozen in guilt and cowardice, and the poor black maid bleeding on the driveway like roadkill. Sabria felt something crack inside her chest, not her ribs, though those ached from where Callista had grabbed her, but something deeper. Something that had been holding her together for 25 years of knowing her place in a world that had never shown her kindness. "You want to know what I saw?" Callista's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt more dangerous than her screaming. She leaned down until her face was inches from Sabria's, her breath smelling of expensive wine and bitter entitlement. "I saw a little nobody who thinks she can climb out of the gutter by spreading her legs for my husband." The slap came without warning, Callista's manicured hand cracking across Sabria's cheek with enough force to snap her head sideways. The sound echoed off the mansion's walls like a gunshot, and for a moment, the world went completely silent. When Sabria looked up, there were tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of pain or humiliation anymore. They were tears of rage, hot, burning, transformative rage that felt like lightning in her veins. "Get off my property," Callista said, straightening her designer dress with trembling hands. "Pack whatever pathetic belongings you have and get out. If I see you anywhere near my husband again, if I see you anywhere near my house, anywhere near my neighborhood, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. And don't think about asking for references. No one in this city will hire you when I'm done spreading the word about what kind of woman you really are." Sabria rose to her feet slowly, feeling every eye in the neighborhood on her. The security guard who'd turned off his engine to watch the show, the gardeners who'd stopped trimming hedges, the dog walker who'd frozen on the sidewalk with her mouth hanging open. All of Atlanta's elite society would know by morning that the Blackwell's maid had been caught throwing herself at the husband and publicly dragged from his car like a common prostitute. Her reputation, what little she'd had, was destroyed. Her job was gone. Her tiny apartment in Decatur that she could barely afford even with steady work? She'd lose that too within a month. But as she stood there in the dying light, feeling the sting of the slap fade into something harder and more permanent, Sabria Matthews made a promise to herself. A promise that would have terrified the broken girl she'd been that morning. She looked directly into Callista Blackwell's eyes that held all the fear and insecurity that money could never quite buy away, and spoke in a voice steady as stone. "You have no idea who you just made an enemy of." The words hung in the humid air like a prophecy. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and somewhere deep in her chest, something that had been sleeping for 25 years finally began to wake up. Have you ever been pushed so far that you discovered strength you didn't know existed? What do you think will happen when someone with nothing left to lose decides to fight back? Drop your thoughts below. This story is just getting started. The Greyhound bus wheezed to a stop at the downtown Atlanta station at 11:47 p.m., 3 hours after Sabria had walked away from the Blackwell mansion with nothing but the clothes on her back and $17 in her pocket. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting everything in harsh, unforgiving white that made the waiting passengers look like ghosts of themselves. Sabria sat in the plastic chair closest to the wall, knees drawn up to her chest, watching the late-night parade of humanity shuffle past. A mother with 2 sleeping children clinging to her legs. An elderly man clutching a paper bag that smelled like cheap bourbon. A teenager with track marks on her arms staring at nothing with hollow eyes. These are my people, she thought, and for the first time in years, that didn't feel like a defeat. Her reflection in the terminal's grimy windows showed a woman she barely recognized. Torn uniform, tangled hair, a red handprint still visible on her dark cheek. But her eyes held something new. Something that burned steady and bright despite the fluorescent wasteland around her. The payphone near the restrooms had been calling to her for the past hour, but she'd resisted. There was only one person in this world who might answer if she called. Only one person who'd ever shown her unconditional love, and Sabria had been too proud, too ashamed of her circumstances to reach out in 2 years. Pride, she thought bitterly. Pride is a luxury I can no longer afford. She fed quarters into the slot with trembling fingers and dialed a number she'd never forgotten, even when she tried to. The phone rang once, twice. Hello. The voice was gravelly with sleep and age, but underneath was a warmth that made Sabria's chest tighten with homesickness. Grandma Essie? Her voice cracked on the words. It's Sabria. Silence. Then, baby girl? Lord have mercy, is that really you? Esther Williams had raised Sabria from age 8 to 18 after her father, Essie's own son, had finally drunk himself to death, but not before spending a decade making sure Sabria knew she was the reason his wife was dead. Essie had been a cleaning woman at Emory University for 43 years, raising 6 children and countless grandchildren in a shotgun house in the old Fourth Ward that somehow always had room for one more broken soul. I'm in trouble, Grandma. The words tumbled out in a rush. I lost my job. I don't have anywhere to go. I know I haven't called. I know I've been stubborn and proud and... Hush now. Essie's voice was firm but gentle. You know my door is always open to you, baby girl. Always has been, always will be. But tell me true, what kind of trouble we talking about? So Sabria told her. About the mansion in Buckhead, about Cashin Blackwell's unexpected kindness, about his wife's jealousy and rage, about being dragged from the car like garbage, slapped like a child, threatened with arrest if she dared show her face in their world again. That woman put her hands on you. The temperature in Essie's voice dropped 20 degrees. It doesn't matter. She's rich, she's white, she's connected. I'm nobody. I'm nothing. Don't you dare. The sharpness in Essie's voice made Sabria flinch. Don't you dare let that poisonous woman make you believe lies about yourself. You are somebody, Sabria Matthews. You are my granddaughter. You are descended from women who survived slavery, who built communities with their bare hands, who raised children in the face of hatred and somehow still found ways to love. You think your mama died bringing you into this world, so you could let some jealous rich woman convince you that you're nothing. Tears burned Sabria's eyes. She'd never talked about her mother. The subject was too painful, too wrapped up in her father's blame and her own guilt. But Essie was right. Maria Santos Matthews had been 18 years old when she bled out on a hospital table, giving her life so Sabria could have one. That had to count for something. I'm scared, Grandma, she whispered. Good, Essie said firmly. Scared means you're alive. Scared means you still got fight left in you. Now you get yourself on the next bus to Birmingham. I'll be waiting at the station with soup and a plan. A plan. Essie chuckled, and the sound was like sunlight breaking through clouds. Baby, you think your old grandma lived 78 years in the South without learning a few things about dealing with folks who think they're better than you? Rich, poor, white, black, bullies are bullies, and they all got the same weak spots. After hanging up, Sabria sat in the terminal for another hour, watching the city beyond the windows. Atlanta sprawled out in all directions like a promise and a threat rolled into one. The city where Martin Luther King Jr. had preached about dreams, where her mother had died, where she'd just been publicly humiliated by a woman who saw her as less than human. But it was also the city where she'd learned to read in a library that didn't care about the color of her skin. The city where she'd earned her GED despite everything. The city where she'd spent 2 years observing how the wealthy lived, how they spoke, how they wielded power like weapons. I know their world now, she realized. I know their weaknesses. The bus to Birmingham wouldn't leave until 6 a.m., which gave her plenty of time to think. To plan. To remember every cruel word Callista Blackwell had spoken, every moment of cowardice she'd witnessed in Cashin's eyes, every detail of their lives that they'd carelessly revealed to the nobody who cleaned their house. A businessman in an expensive suit walked past, talking loudly on his phone about stock options and merger deals. He looked right through Sabria as if she were invisible, the same way the Blackwells had, the same way everyone in their world did. But invisibility, she was beginning to realize, was its own kind of power. People said things in front of invisible women. They revealed secrets. They made mistakes. At 2 a.m., a young woman about Sabria's age approached the phone bank, crying softly as she dialed. She was dressed in a waitress uniform from some upscale restaurant, and Sabria could see the defeat in her shoulders, the exhaustion in her movements. You okay, honey? Sabria found herself asking. The woman looked up, surprised to be noticed. Lost my job today. Customer complained about my attitude, said I was uppity. Manager fired me on the spot. She laughed bitterly. Uppity for asking if they wanted their change. I know that feeling, Sabria said quietly. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, 2 women at the bottom of the world's food chain, invisible to most but not to each other. When the woman's bus was called, she squeezed Sabria's hand. Whatever you're running from, she said, I hope you find something better on the other side. I'm not running from anything, Sabria replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. I'm running toward it. As dawn broke over Atlanta's skyline, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded her of her mother's favorite flowers, Sabria Matthews climbed aboard the bus to Birmingham. In her pocket was $17, a torn piece of paper with her grandmother's address, and something infinitely more valuable, the beginning of a plan. The last thing she saw as the bus pulled away from the station was the gleaming towers of Buckhead rising in the distance like monuments to arrogance. Somewhere up there, Callista Blackwell was probably sleeping peacefully in her silk sheets, satisfied that she'd crushed another threat to her perfect life. She had no idea that she'd just awakened something that had been sleeping for 25 years. Something patient. Something determined. Something that understood, perhaps for the first time, exactly how much power an invisible woman could wield when she finally decided to be seen. What do you think Grandma Essie's plan might involve? Have you ever had someone in your life who believed in you when you couldn't believe in yourself? Share your thoughts about the power of having someone in your corner. 3 months later, Sabria Matthews walked through the gleaming doors of Meridian Financial Group's downtown Atlanta headquarters wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit that cost more than she used to make in a month. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo, her makeup flawless, her smile confident but not aggressive. To anyone watching, she looked like she belonged in this temple of Southern old money, another young professional climbing the ladder of success. They had no idea they were looking at a weapon 3 months in the making. The elevator to the 42nd floor was packed with the city's financial elite, men and women who controlled billions of dollars from their glass offices in the sky. Sabria stood among them, invisible in the way only black women in corporate America understood, present but not seen, qualified but not acknowledged, necessary but never valued. Perfect, she thought, watching their reflections in the polished steel doors. Stay invisible a little longer. The transformation hadn't been easy. 3 months in Birmingham with Grandma Essie had been 3 months of healing, planning, and preparing for war. Essie had connections Sabria never knew existed. Church sisters who'd worked in the homes of Alabama's wealthiest families for decades, collecting secrets like seashells. Nieces and nephews who'd escaped the South and made names for themselves in finance, law, and business across the country. Rich folks always underestimate poor folks, Essie had said over breakfast one morning, sliding a business card across the kitchen table. Especially rich white folks. They think because they got money, they got sense. Most foolish assumption in the world. The card belonged to Marcus Williams, Essie's nephew and Sabria's second cousin, a man who'd built a financial empire in Atlanta while staying connected to his roots in Birmingham's projects. He'd been skeptical when Sabria first called, but 15 minutes of conversation had convinced him that his little cousin wasn't the broken girl who'd left Atlanta with nothing. She was something far more dangerous. The elevator dinged at the 42nd floor, and Sabria stepped out into the marble and mahogany world of Meridian Financial's executive suites. The firm managed portfolios for Atlanta's wealthiest families, including, according to her research, a substantial portion of the Blackwell fortune. Ms. Santos. A receptionist with perfectly blonde hair and a practiced smile looked up from her desk. Mr. Harrison is ready to see you. Sabria had chosen to use her mother's maiden name for this new identity, Maria Santos Matthews's final gift to the daughter she died bringing into the world. It felt like armor, like a blessing, like justice. James Harrison's office commanded a view of the entire city, floor-to-ceiling windows framing Atlanta's skyline like a painting of power and ambition. The man himself was everything central casting would order for Southern gentleman financier: silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of smile that had been charming money out of people's pockets for 40 years. Ms. Santos, he said, rising to shake her hand. Marcus speaks very highly of you. Says you have some interesting ideas about alternative investment strategies for high-net-worth clients. I do. Sabria settled into the leather chair across from his desk, crossing her legs with practiced elegance. 3 months of deportment training from one of Essie's church sisters, a woman who'd worked for Birmingham's social elite for 30 years, had taught her how to move through their world like she was born to it. But first, I have a confession to make. Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. I didn't come here just for the job opportunity, Sabria continued, her voice steady as steel. I came because you manage the Blackwell family portfolio, and I have information about their financial activities that I believe you'll find illuminating. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Harrison leaned back in his chair, his practiced smile faltering. Ms. Santos, I hope you're not suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything, Sabria interrupted smoothly. I'm stating facts. Cashin Blackwell has been systematically moving money through shell companies based in the Cayman Islands. His wife Callista has been using charitable foundations, including one supposedly dedicated to helping disadvantaged youth in Atlanta, to launder money from her father's textile empire. And both of them have been filing false tax returns for the past 3 years. Harrison's face had gone pale. How could you possibly know? I was their housekeeper for 2 years. Sabria's smile was sharp as a blade. Do you know what's interesting about housekeepers, Mr. Harrison? We're invisible. People have conversations in front of us like we're furniture. They leave documents on desks, computers unlocked, phone calls on speaker. They never imagine that the poor black woman emptying their trash cans might be smart enough to understand what she's seeing and hearing. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder, placing it on Harrison's desk with the care of someone handling explosives. Photocopies of bank statements, records of wire transfers, email printouts, phone recordings. Georgia is a one-party consent state, and I was technically a party to every conversation that happened in that house. Her voice remained calm, professional, but her eyes blazed with something that made Harrison lean away from his desk. Enough evidence to send both of them to federal prison for 20 years. Harrison stared at the folder like it might bite him. What do you want? A job, Sabria said simply. A real job, with real responsibilities and real opportunities for advancement. I want to work in wealth management, learning from the best in the business. I want to understand how money really works in this city, how power flows, how the game is actually played. And in exchange? In exchange, the Blackwell's secrets stay secret. For now. She leaned forward, her smile never wavering. But here's the thing, Mr. Harrison. I'm not interested in destroying them. I'm interested in becoming them. I want their life, their power, their position in this city's hierarchy. I want everything they have, and I want them to watch me take it. The office fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic 42 floors below. Harrison's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the folder, then pulled back as if it were on fire. You're talking about blackmail, he said quietly. I'm talking about leverage, Sabria corrected. The same leverage every powerful person in this city uses to get what they want. The only difference is that mine comes from the bottom up instead of the top down. Harrison stood and walked to his windows, staring out at the city spread below them. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful, almost admiring. You know, in 40 years of managing money for Atlanta's elite, I've seen plenty of people try to climb the ladder. Most of them fail because they don't understand that wealth isn't just about money. It's about information, connections, and the willingness to use both when necessary. He turned to face her, and something in his expression had shifted. You understand that, don't you? I understand that every person who ever told me I was nothing, that I didn't belong, that I should know my place, they were teaching me the most valuable lesson of my life. Sabria stood, smoothing down her suit jacket. They were teaching me exactly how their world works. And now I'm going to use that knowledge to make myself indispensable to it. The job starts Monday, Harrison said quietly. Junior associate in wealth management. $60,000 a year plus bonuses. You'll be working directly under Sarah Chun, one of our best portfolio managers. Thank you. Sabria moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Mr. Harrison? I'll be needing an advance on my salary. I have an apartment to rent in Buckhead, right in the heart of the neighborhood where I used to clean houses. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, Sabria caught her reflection in the polished doors and saw someone she barely recognized. Not the broken girl who'd been dragged from a car 3 months ago, but a woman with purpose, with power, with a plan that was just beginning to unfold. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Heard you got the job. Impressive. We should talk. C.B. Cashin Blackwell. Somehow, word had already reached him. In a city like Atlanta, news traveled fast through the networks of power and privilege. He probably thought he could intimidate her, buy her off, make her disappear again. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Sabria deleted the message without responding and stepped out into the Georgia sunshine, feeling the weight of her new identity settling around her like armor. 3 months ago, she'd been nobody, a poor black maid who could be discarded without a second thought. Now she was something far more dangerous, a poor black maid who'd figured out how to stop being poor. But she had no intention of stopping being dangerous. 6 weeks into her new life, Sabria stood in the marble lobby of the Four Seasons Atlanta, watching Cashin Blackwell emerge from a black town car like a man walking to his own execution. He'd finally accepted her invitation to meet, after she'd made it clear through intermediaries that ignoring her was no longer an option. The hotel's afternoon crowd provided perfect cover: wealthy tourists, business travelers, socialites meeting for champagne lunches. She'd chosen the location carefully, public enough that he couldn't lose his temper, private enough for them to speak freely, expensive enough that she belonged here now. He spotted her immediately, and she saw the moment of recognition hit him like a physical blow. The last time he'd seen her, she'd been broken and bleeding on his driveway. Now she sat in a leather armchair wearing a designer dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, her natural hair styled in elegant locks, diamond earrings, gifts from her grateful new clients, catching the afternoon light. "Jesus," he breathed, stopping just inside the lobby entrance. For a moment, he looked exactly like what he was, a man who'd just seen a ghost rise from the dead and put on Armani. Sabria stood with fluid grace, extending her hand as he approached. "Hello, Cashin. Thank you for coming." He took her hand automatically, and she felt the slight tremor in his fingers. Up close, she could see the changes 3 months had wrought in him. The lines around his eyes were deeper, his usually perfect hair showed threads of silver, and there was something haunted in his expression that hadn't been there before. "I have to admit," he said as they settled into facing chairs, "when my security team told me you were working at Meridian Financial, I thought they'd made a mistake. But then I saw you leaving the building yesterday, and—" He shook his head. "How is this possible? Hard work, good connections, and a very clear understanding of what I want." Sabria signaled the waitress for tea service, her movements controlled and elegant. "You look surprised. Did you think humiliating me would break me permanently?" "I didn't humiliate you," Cashin said quickly. Callista couldn't have dragged me from your car without your permission." Sabria's voice remained calm, conversational, but something in her eyes made him flinch. "You stood there and watched your wife treat me like garbage, and you said nothing. Did nothing. That makes you complicit." The tea service arrived, giving them both a moment to compose themselves. Sabria poured with practiced elegance, another skill learned during her Birmingham transformation, while Cashin watched her with the fascination of a man studying a particularly dangerous snake. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "To understand why you offered me that ride in the first place." She set down the teapot and met his eyes directly. "For 2 years, you barely spoke to me except to say please and thank you. Then suddenly, you're pulling over in the rain like some kind of good Samaritan. Why?" Cashin was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I saw you walking in that storm, and for a minute, you reminded me of someone I used to be. Someone who would have helped a stranger without thinking about the consequences." He laughed bitterly. "Turns out I was right about the consequences. Who did you use to be? Someone who believed in justice. Someone who thought wealth came with responsibility, not just privilege." He stared into his teacup like it held answers. "My grandfather built Blackwell Industries by treating his workers fairly, paying living wages, investing in the community. I wanted to continue that legacy. But marrying into Callista's family meant marrying into their way of doing business, their values, their methods." His jaw tightened. "You learn to compromise. You tell yourself it's temporary, that you'll change things from the inside. And then one day you wake up and realize you've become everything you used to hate. Sabria felt something unexpected, a flicker of sympathy for the man across from her. But sympathy was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not yet. That's a beautiful story, she said softly. But it doesn't explain why you're here. Why you accepted my invitation when you could have just ignored me. Cashin set down his teacup and leaned forward. Because I know what you have on us. And I know what you could do with it. Do you? Sabria's smile was sharp as winter wind. Tell me what you think I could do. Destroy us. Send us to prison. Take everything we've built. His voice was steady, but she could see the fear in his eyes. The question is, what's it going to cost to stop you? You think this is about money? Everything's about money in my world. Your world, Sabria repeated thoughtfully. Not our world. Not the world. Your world. She stood and walked to the lobby's floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city sprawling beyond. That's your first mistake, Cashin. Thinking this world belongs to you. He followed her to the windows, standing close enough that she could smell his cologne, expensive, masculine, tinged with desperation. I know I hurt you, he said quietly. I know I was a coward that night. If I could go back. You can't. She turned to face him, and the afternoon light streaming through the windows turned her brown skin golden, made her look like something carved from precious metal. But you can do something else. What? You can help me take it all down. The words hung between them like a challenge, a promise, a threat. Cashin stared at her with something that might have been admiration if it hadn't been so terrified. You want me to betray my own wife? I want you to become the man you told me you used to be. Sabria stepped closer, close enough that he had to look down to meet her eyes. I want you to remember what justice feels like. What integrity costs. What it means to stand up for someone who can't stand up for themselves. And if I refuse? Then you go down with her when I'm finished. The threat was delivered in the same tone she'd used to discuss the weather, but Cashin heard it for what it was, an absolute promise. You're not the same person, he said, studying her face as if memorizing it. The woman who worked in my house. She would never have done this. That woman died the night your wife dragged her from your car. Sabria's voice was soft, almost gentle. I'm what rose from her ashes. For a moment, they stood in perfect silence, the noise of the lobby fading around them. Something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, or understanding. The acknowledgement that they were both trapped in the same web of wealth and power and cruelty, just on different sides of it. I need time to think, Cashin said finally. You have 48 hours. Sabria collected her purse and moved toward the lobby exit. After that, I move forward with or without you. Sabria. Her name stopped her at the door. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For that night, for my cowardice, for everything. She looked back at him, this powerful man who suddenly looked small and lost in the marble grandeur of the hotel lobby, and felt that flicker of sympathy again. Apologies don't change the past, she said quietly. But actions can change the future. As she walked through downtown Atlanta toward her new Buckhead apartment, Sabria felt the familiar weight of eyes watching her. She'd grown used to the attention over the past 6 weeks, the way conversations stopped when she entered rooms, the way old Atlanta society whispered about the mysterious new player in their financial circles. Let them whisper. Let them wonder. Let them fear. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chun, her supervisor at Meridian. Dinner meeting tomorrow night with the Pemberton account. We're something impressive. This one's worth 50 million. Sabria smiled as she typed back, impressive is my specialty. Another text, this one from an unknown number. Saw you at the Four Seasons today. Interesting choice of companion. We should meet. Ch. Callista. Somehow, Sabria wasn't surprised that Cashin's wife had already heard about their meeting. In Atlanta's social circles, information traveled faster than gossip, and gossip traveled at the speed of light. She deleted the message without responding. Let Callista sweat. Let her wonder. Let her lie awake at night imagining what her husband and his former maid had discussed over afternoon tea. Because the truth was far more dangerous than anything Callista could imagine. The truth was that Sabria Santos wasn't just climbing the ladder of Atlanta's elite society. She was building her own ladder, rung by rung, secret by secret, connection by connection. And when she reached the top, everyone who'd ever looked down on her would finally understand exactly what they'd created when they'd tried to destroy her. Do you think Cashin will help Sabria bring down his own wife? What would you do if you had to choose between loyalty to family and doing what's right? The tension is building. Share your predictions below. The Pemberton Foundation Gala was the social event of Atlanta's fall season. 800 of the city's most powerful people gathered in the ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel to celebrate 50 years of charitable giving to underprivileged communities. The irony wasn't lost on Sabria as she moved through the crowd in a midnight blue gown that cost more than she used to make in 6 months, accepting congratulations on the $50 million Pemberton account she just secured from Meridian Financial. She'd become the darling of Atlanta's financial elite in just 2 months. The mysterious Ms. Santos, who seemed to understand wealth management with an intuition that impressed even the most seasoned advisors. What they didn't know was that her intuition came from having observed their world from the invisible margins for 2 years, learning their patterns, their weaknesses, their secrets. Ms. Santos. Eleanor Pemberton herself approached, her diamond necklace catching the chandelier light. I simply must introduce you to everyone. Your presentation last week was absolutely brilliant. You understand our family's values better than advisors we've worked with for decades. Thank you, Mrs. Pemberton. Sabria's smile was warm but controlled. I find that understanding people's true motivations makes all the difference in financial planning. As Eleanor led her through the crowd, Sabria caught sight of Cashin across the ballroom. He looked haggard, desperate. A man who'd spent 48 hours wrestling with an impossible choice. When their eyes met, he shook his head almost imperceptibly. He'd chosen loyalty over justice. Exactly as she'd expected. There's someone I'd like you to meet, Eleanor was saying. Agent Jennifer Morrison, FBI Financial Crimes Division. She's been working with several of our charitable organizations to ensure compliance with new federal regulations. The woman who stepped forward was unremarkable in the way only federal agents could be. Average height, professional dress, the kind of face that disappeared in a crowd. But her handshake was firm, and her eyes were sharp as laser beams. Ms. Santos, Agent Morrison said. I've heard impressive things about your work at Meridian. Perhaps we could chat sometime about some of the interesting financial patterns you might have observed in your client work. I'd be happy to, Sabria replied smoothly. I believe in full transparency when it comes to financial compliance. Eleanor beamed and moved away to greet other guests, leaving Sabria alone with the FBI agent. For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence, 2 women who understood the weight of secrets. The Blackwell portfolio, Morrison said quietly. I assume you've had access to their financial records through Meridian? I have. Interesting family. Complex financial structure. Lot of moving parts. Indeed. Sabria sipped her champagne, watching Cashin across the room as he spoke with his wife. Callista looked radiant in white silk, playing the role of devoted wife and philanthropist to perfection. Some structures are more complex than they appear. Some less. I'd love to discuss those complexities sometime. Perhaps over coffee. I'm sure we can arrange something. Morrison handed her a business card that looked like any other networking exchange at a charity gala. I look forward to our conversation, Ms. Santos. As the agent melted back into the crowd, Sabria felt a presence behind her, expensive perfume and barely controlled rage. Well, Callista Blackwell's voice was honey over razor blades. If it isn't the mysterious Ms. Santos. I have to admit, I'm curious about you. You appear out of nowhere, charm Atlanta's financial elite, and somehow end up at the same events as my family. It's almost like you're following us." Sabria turned slowly, her expression perfectly composed. "Mrs. Blackwell, how lovely to see you again." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Callista's perfect smile faltered for just a moment, long enough for recognition to dawn in her eyes. "I'm sorry, have we met?" But her voice shook slightly. "Oh yes," Sabria said softly. "We've met." The ballroom seemed to fade around them as Callista stared at her, seeing past the elegant dress and professional styling to the woman underneath. The woman she'd dragged from her husband's car. The woman she'd slapped. The woman she'd tried to destroy. "You," Callista breathed. But that's impossible. You were nothing. You were nobody." "I was your maid," Sabria said clearly, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "For 2 years, I cleaned your house, washed your dishes, and listened to your conversations. All while you treated me like I was invisible." A hush fell over their section of the ballroom as Atlanta's elite turned to watch the drama unfold. Phones appeared discreetly as society mavens prepared to document whatever was about to happen. Callista's face went white, then red, then white again. "You lying little bitch." Sabria finished smoothly. "That's what you called me that night you dragged me from your husband's car." Along with several other colorful terms I won't repeat in such elegant company. "Security." Callista's voice cracked as she looked around desperately. "This woman is she's what?" Sabria's voice carried across the ballroom with perfect clarity. "A liar? Then why don't you explain to everyone here how you know I'm lying? How do you know I was never your employee unless you remember exactly who I am?" The crowd pressed closer, sensing blood in the water. This was the kind of scandal Atlanta's social elite lived for, public destruction of one of their own. Cashin appeared at his wife's side, his face ashen. "Callista, let's go home." "No." Callista whirled on him, her perfect composure completely shattered. "You did this. You brought her back. I told you we should have had her arrested that night, but you said—" She stopped, realizing what she just admitted in front of 800 witnesses and countless phone cameras. "You said what?" Sabria asked gently. "What did your husband say when you wanted to have me arrested for the crime of accepting a ride in the rain?" But Callista was beyond hearing, beyond thinking. 3 months of fear and paranoia had finally broken her control. "You think you've won something," she screamed. "You think putting on fancy clothes makes you one of us? You're still the same trash I found in my husband's car. You're still nothing." The ballroom fell completely silent. 800 of Atlanta's most powerful people watched as one of their queens revealed herself to be exactly what they'd always suspected: a cruel, shallow woman whose only power came from inherited money and inherited hatred. Sabria smiled, not the practiced professional smile she'd worn all evening, but something genuine and brilliant and terrifying. "You're absolutely right about one thing, Callista," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "I am the same woman you found in your husband's car 3 months ago. The same woman who spent 2 years watching you commit federal crimes while treating me like I didn't exist. The same woman who documented every conversation, every illegal transaction, every tax fraud scheme." She paused, letting the words sink in. "The same woman who's been working with the FBI for the past 6 weeks to build a case against you and your family's criminal enterprise." If the ballroom had been quiet before, it was tomb silent now. Callista's face went from red to white to gray, and she swayed on her feet like she might faint. "Agent Morrison," Sabria called out, never taking her eyes off Callista's face. "I believe you have something for Mrs. Blackwell?" The FBI agent materialized from the crowd with 2 other agents flanking her, federal badges gleaming under the chandelier light. "Callista Blackwell," Morrison said formally, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering, tax fraud, and violation of federal charity regulations." As the handcuffs clicked around Callista's wrists, she turned to her husband with eyes full of betrayal and rage. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew what she was, and you let her get close to us anyway." Cashin looked at his wife, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. And what he saw there wasn't love or partnership or even friendship. It was entitlement, cruelty, and the kind of moral emptiness that money could never fill. "No," he said quietly. "I didn't know what she was." He looked across the crowd at Sabria, standing tall and unbroken in her midnight blue gown, surrounded by the wreckage of her enemies. "But I should have." As the FBI led Callista away through the ballroom, past 800 of Atlanta's elite holding their phones aloft like torches, Sabria felt something she hadn't experienced in 25 years of life. She felt free. But freedom, she was about to discover, was just the beginning of her story. Can you imagine the power of that moment, watching your oppressor be led away in handcuffs in front of everyone who matters? But this is only the midpoint. What do you think happens when someone achieves their revenge but realizes they've fallen in love with their enemy's husband? Share your thoughts on this incredible twist. 3 weeks after Callista's arrest, Sabria stood in her Buckhead penthouse apartment watching the sunrise paint Atlanta's skyline in shades of gold and crimson, feeling more alone than she had in the Birmingham bus terminal 6 months ago. Victory, she was learning, was a cold companion. The city below buzzed with scandal. Every newspaper, every gossip blog, every society column carried updates on the Blackwell case. Federal prosecutors had frozen assets worth over $200 million. 3 other prominent Atlanta families had been implicated in the money laundering scheme. The charitable foundation that was supposed to help disadvantaged youth, kids like she'd been, had been revealed as nothing more than an elaborate tax shelter. She should have felt vindicated, triumphant. Instead, she felt hollow. Her phone buzzed with yet another interview request, this time from 60 Minutes. The mysterious whistleblower who'd brought down Atlanta's golden couple had become a media sensation, though she'd refused all requests for on-camera interviews. Let them wonder. Let them speculate. Her story wasn't for their entertainment. The real problem wasn't the media attention or even the death threats she'd been receiving from Callista's supporters. The real problem was standing on her balcony in yesterday's clothes, staring at the same sunrise with eyes that held something dangerously close to despair. Cashin. He'd been coming to her apartment every morning for 2 weeks, not to plead his wife's case or beg for mercy, but simply to apologize. Over and over again, as if the words could somehow undo 25 years of damage. "You can't keep doing this to yourself," she said without turning around. She heard him sigh, heard the soft clink of his coffee cup against the balcony railing. "The lawyers think she'll take a plea deal," he said quietly. 15 years instead of 30. She'd be out in 10 with good behavior. "That's not why you're here." "No." His voice was raw, exhausted. "I'm here because I keep thinking about that night. About who I could have been if I'd made a different choice." Sabria finally turned to face him. 3 weeks of sleepless nights had carved new lines around his eyes, and his usually perfect appearance was disheveled in a way that made him look more human than she'd ever seen him. "You can't change the past, Cashin. But I can change what happens next." He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with desperation. "The federal prosecutors want me to testify against her. Against her family. They're offering immunity in exchange for cooperation. And I don't know if I can do it." His laugh was bitter, hollow. 20 years of marriage, and I still can't decide if I'm protecting her out of loyalty or cowardice. Sabria felt something dangerous stir in her chest, something that felt uncomfortably like sympathy. She'd spent 6 months planning his destruction, and now she was watching him destroy himself with guilt and indecision. "What do you want from me, Cashin?" "I want you to tell me what the right thing is." He looked at her with eyes that held no calculation, no manipulation, just a broken man seeking absolution from the woman he'd helped destroy. "You've become the conscience I never had. The strength I never found. Tell me what justice looks like." The words hit her like a physical blow. For 6 months, she'd been so focused on bringing down his wife that she'd never considered what would happen to him in the aftermath. Never considered that the man who'd stood silently while she was humiliated might be capable of genuine remorse. Never considered that she might fall in love with him. The realization crashed over her like a wave, stealing her breath. Somewhere between his fumbling attempts at apology and his obvious self-loathing, somewhere between watching him choose his wife over justice and seeing him realize what that choice had cost, she'd done the one thing she'd sworn she'd never do. She'd fallen for the enemy. "I can't tell you what justice looks like," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I could, but—" She turned back to the window, unable to meet his eyes. "Justice for me meant watching your world burn. But now I'm watching you burn with it, and I don't know how that makes me feel." Sabria. Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer, like a plea. "Look at me." She didn't turn around. Couldn't. Because if she looked at him, really looked at him, she might do something catastrophically stupid. Like forgive him. Like tell him she'd started falling for him weeks ago in that hotel lobby. Like admit that her victory felt like ashes because it was destroying the man she'd grown to love. "You want to know what the right thing is," she said, staring at her reflection in the window glass. "The right thing is testifying against your wife. Telling the truth about everything you've seen, everything you've known, everything you've been complicit in. The right thing is choosing justice over loyalty, even when it hurts. And us." The question was so quiet she almost didn't hear it. What about us? There is no us. The lie tasted like poison on her tongue. There can't be. Not while your wife is fighting for her freedom. Not while you're still choosing sides. Not while I'm the woman who destroyed your life. "You didn't destroy my life," Cashin said, and there was something in his voice that made her turn around despite herself. "You saved it. You showed me who I'd become, who I'd married, what I'd been enabling. You gave me a chance to remember who I used to be." He was standing close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Close enough that when he reached out to touch her face, she didn't pull away. "I love you," he whispered. "I know I have no right to say it. I know you'll never forgive me for that night, for my cowardice, for everything I didn't do when I should have. But I love you, Sabria. I love your strength, your intelligence, your refusal to be broken by people like me. I love the woman who turned her pain into power and her humiliation into justice." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither of them dared cross. Sabria felt tears burning her eyes, tears of rage, of heartbreak, of a longing so fierce it felt like drowning. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. It doesn't have to be hard." His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, catching a tear she didn't realize had fallen. "We could leave. Tonight. Disappear somewhere your past doesn't matter, and my name doesn't carry the weight of everything I've done wrong." For a moment, just a moment, she let herself imagine it. A life where she wasn't Sabria Matthews, the woman who'd brought down Atlanta's golden couple. Where he wasn't Cashin Blackwell, heir to a criminal empire. Where they were just two people who'd found something real in the wreckage of their old lives. Then reality crashed back in like a cold wave. "And let your wife's family continue laundering money? Let them keep stealing from charities meant to help kids like me?" She stepped back, breaking the spell of his touch. "Let them get away with everything because we decided our happiness was more important than justice? That's not what I'm saying." "That's exactly what you're saying." Her voice was steady now, cold as winter steel. "You're asking me to run away with you while your wife's crimes go unpunished, or asking me to choose love over the justice I've spent 6 months fighting for. I'm asking you to choose us over revenge. This was never about revenge." The words exploded out of her with all the fury she'd been holding back. "This was about standing up for everyone like me who's ever been treated like garbage by people like you. This was about proving that invisible women can become visible, that powerless people can find power, that justice isn't just for the wealthy. Cashin stared at her, and she watched something die in his eyes. Hope, maybe, or love, or the fantasy that they could somehow build something beautiful on the foundation of so much pain. "You're right," he said finally. "You're absolutely right. I was being selfish. Again." He moved toward the door, and panic seized her chest. This was it, the moment he walked away, and she lost the only person in the world who'd ever seen all of her and loved her anyway. The moment she chose justice over love and discovered that victory could feel like the cruelest defeat. Cashin. He stopped, hand on the doorknob. "When you testify, when this is all over, will you wait for me?" He turned, and the smile that spread across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. "I'll wait," he said. "However long it takes." After he left, Sabria sat on her balcony watching Atlanta wake up below her, feeling the weight of everything she'd gained and everything she'd sacrificed. She'd brought down her enemies, found her power, and discovered a love she'd never expected. But she'd also learned that justice and love didn't always align, that sometimes the right choice was the one that broke your heart. Her phone rang, Agent Morrison with updates on the federal case. More arrests coming. More assets frozen. More lives destroyed in the pursuit of the truth. "Ms. Santos," Morrison said, "we're going to need you to testify at the grand jury hearing next week. Are you prepared for that?" Sabria looked out at the city spread below her, the city where she'd been born, abandoned, humiliated, and ultimately reborn. "I'm ready," she said. And for the first time since this all began, she meant it. The moment when love and justice collide. Have you ever had to choose between what your heart wants and what you know is right? Sabria's about to face the ultimate test. What do you think happens when the woman who fought for justice has to decide if love is worth the wait? The federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta was a fortress of marble and steel, its columns rising like judgment itself toward the gray October sky. Sabria walked up the steps in a charcoal gray suit that cost more than her childhood home's monthly rent, feeling the weight of every camera, every reporter, every curious stare from the crowd gathered to witness what the media had dubbed the trial of the century. 6 months of legal proceedings had led to this moment. Callista Blackwell sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit that made her look small and ordinary, nothing like the Golden Queen who'd once dragged a poor black woman from her husband's car. Her family's textile empire had crumbled under federal investigation. 3 generations of wealth gone. Dozens of co-conspirators facing prison time. And today, Sabria would deliver the testimony that would seal it all. "Ms. Santos." Agent Morrison appeared at her elbow as they entered the courthouse lobby. "Are you ready for this?" "I've been ready for 25 years, Sabria replied, her voice steady as stone. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Atlanta's remaining elite sat in the gallery like vultures, eager to watch the final destruction of one of their own. Media representatives filled every available seat. And there in the third row sat Grandma Essie in her best church dress, her presence a reminder of where Sabria had come from and why this moment mattered. But it was the man in the witness waiting area who made her heart skip. Cashin, dressed in a navy suit that couldn't hide the weight he'd lost or the haunted look in his eyes. He'd testified 3 days ago, fulfilling his promise to choose justice over loyalty. His wife's lawyers had torn into him for hours, painting him as a betrayer, a liar, a man who'd turned on his own family for a woman who'd seduced him. They weren't entirely wrong about the last part. The prosecution calls Ms. Sabria Santos to the stand. The walk to the witness box felt like walking through fire. Every step carried the weight of her mother's death, her father's blame, her grandmother's love, Callista's cruelty, Cashin's cowardice, and her own transformation from invisible victim to visible force of justice. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. As if she'd ever done anything else. "Ms. Santos," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court how you first came to work for the Blackwell family." For the next 4 hours, Sabria laid out everything. Every conversation she'd overheard while emptying trash cans. Every document she'd photographed while dusting desks. Every phone call she'd recorded while serving dinner. Every moment of cruelty, every act of financial fraud, every instance where the Blackwells had treated the law as something that applied to other people. The defense attorney, a shark in an expensive suit, tried to destroy her credibility. Tried to paint her as a vengeful ex-employee, a woman scorned, a gold digger who'd seduced a married man to get revenge on his wife. "Isn't it true, Miss Santos," he said with theatrical disdain, "that you pursued a romantic relationship with Mr. Blackwell while working in his home?" "No," Sabria replied calmly. "I maintained a professional relationship with both Mr. and Mrs. Blackwell throughout my employment." "But you've had a romantic relationship with him since then, haven't you?" The courtroom held its breath. Sabria glanced at Cashin in the gallery, saw the pain in his eyes, the way he was prepared to be destroyed all over again for her sake. "Mr. Blackwell and I have developed feelings for each other," she said clearly. "But those feelings didn't exist during my employment, and they have nothing to do with the financial crimes I witnessed and documented." "Nothing to do with them?" The lawyer's voice dripped skepticism. "Isn't it convenient that you fell in love with the husband of the woman you were trying to destroy?" This was the moment. The moment when she could let them paint her as a vindictive woman whose testimony was motivated by personal revenge. The moment when she could protect herself by minimizing her feelings. Instead, she chose truth. "Love isn't convenient," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed courtroom. "Loving Cashin Blackwell has been the most inconvenient thing I've ever experienced. It would have been easier to hate him. Easier to want him destroyed along with his wife. But love doesn't ask for our permission, and justice doesn't depend on our personal feelings." She turned to face the jury directly. "I didn't document Mrs. Blackwell's crimes because I fell in love with her husband. I documented them because children in Atlanta were going without food while she used their charities donations to buy jewelry. Because families were losing their homes while she hid millions in offshore accounts. Because justice isn't supposed to have a price tag, but in her world, everything did." The defense lawyer tried to interrupt, but Sabria continued, her voice rising with passion. "You want to know about inconvenient love? I love a man whose wife I helped put in prison. I love a man whose world I destroyed. I love a man I may never be able to have a real relationship with because of what I've done and who I am. But that inconvenient love doesn't change the facts. It doesn't change the evidence. It doesn't change the truth about what Callista Blackwell did to the city, to those charities, to every person who trusted her with their donations." The courtroom was dead silent. Even the defense attorney seemed momentarily stunned by her raw honesty. "Your Honor," Sabria said, turning to the judge, "I know what I am. I'm the poor black woman who cleaned their house, who was invisible to them until I became inconvenient. I'm the woman who loved someone I probably shouldn't love and pursued justice that probably cost me any chance of happiness. But I'm also the woman who refused to let financial crimes go unpunished just because the criminals wore expensive clothes and lived in mansions." She looked directly at Callista for the first time during the trial. The other woman's face was a mask of rage and humiliation, but underneath, Sabria saw something else: fear. The fear of a woman who'd finally met someone she couldn't intimidate, couldn't buy off, couldn't make disappear. "I'm the woman who remembered that my mother died so I could have a life worth living," Sabria continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper but somehow filling the entire courtroom. "And a life worth living is one where you stand up for what's right, even when it costs you everything you want." When she stepped down from the witness stand, the courtroom erupted in whispers, gasps, and scattered applause quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. But Sabria heard none of it. She only had eyes for Cashin, who was looking at her like she'd just performed a miracle. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous: guilty on all counts. Callista Blackwell would spend the next 25 years in federal prison. Her family's empire was dismantled, their assets distributed to the charities they'd stolen from. Justice, cold and impartial, had finally been served. But as Sabria stood on the courthouse steps, watching the woman who'd once humiliated her being led away in shackles, she felt no triumph. Only exhaustion, relief, and the strange emptiness that comes when a life-defining mission finally reaches its end. Sabria. She turned to find Cashin beside her, his eyes red-rimmed but clear for the first time in months. "Thank you," he said simply. "For everything. For showing me who I really was. For giving me the chance to do the right thing. For—" He gestured helplessly. "For being brave enough to love me despite everything." "What happens now?" she asked. "Now I rebuild," he said. "I've liquidated everything that's left of my assets. I'm donating it all to the charities Callista stole from. Starting over with nothing, just like you did 6 months ago. And us." Cashin smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him since this all began. "Now we find out if love can survive justice," he said. "If two people who've lost everything can build something beautiful from the wreckage of their old lives." As they walked down the courthouse steps together, past the cameras and reporters and curious crowds, Sabria felt something she hadn't experienced since she was a child: hope. Not the desperate hope of someone with nothing left to lose, but the quiet, steady hope of someone who'd fought for what was right and discovered that sometimes, not always but sometimes, the universe rewards that kind of courage. The girl who'd been blamed for her mother's death had become the woman who'd brought justice to an entire city. The maid who'd been dragged from a car in Humiliation had become the force that toppled an empire built on cruelty. And the woman who'd thought love and justice could never coexist had discovered that sometimes, if you're brave enough and patient enough and stubborn enough, you can have both. This is it, the moment truth, justice, and love all collide in a federal courtroom. Did Sabria's choice to pursue both love and justice pay off? What do you think about her decision to be completely honest about loving the enemy's husband? Drop your thoughts on this incredible climax. 3 months after the verdict, Sabria sat in the passenger seat of Cashin's 10-year-old Honda Civic, a car so different from his former Ferrari that it might as well have belonged to another person entirely. They were driving through East Atlanta, past neighborhoods she recognized from her childhood, heading toward the community center where she now worked as director of financial literacy programs. The irony wasn't lost on her. The woman who'd brought down Atlanta's financial elite was now teaching inner-city kids how to balance checkbooks and avoid predatory loans. But it felt right in a way her brief stint in Buckhead's penthouse world never had. "You're quiet," Cashin observed, glancing at her as they stopped at a red light. He looked different too, beard slightly scruffy, wearing a simple button-down shirt instead of designer suits, calluses on his hands from his new job renovating low-income housing. The transformation was remarkable, and not just physically. The guilt and desperation that had haunted his eyes for months had been replaced by something she'd never seen there before: peace. "Just thinking about the interview," she said, though that wasn't entirely true. The CNN interview had gone well, her first major media appearance since the trial, where she talked about second chances and the importance of financial accountability. What had her distracted was the letter in her purse, the one that had arrived that morning with a federal prison postmark. "Want to talk about it?" She pulled out the envelope, surprised to find her hands weren't shaking. 3 months ago, seeing Callista's name on anything would have sent her into a spiral. Now it just felt distant, like something from another life. "She wrote to me," Sabria said simply. Cashin's hands tightened on the steering wheel, but his voice remained calm. "What did she say?" Sabria unfolded the letter, written in Callista's precise handwriting on plain prison stationery. Such a far cry from the monogrammed stationery she'd once used to send thank-you notes to society friends. "She wants to apologize," Sabria said, scanning the words again. "Says she's been going to therapy, that she's beginning to understand how her privilege blinded her to other people's humanity. She's asking for forgiveness." The car was quiet except for the hum of the engine and the distant sound of Atlanta traffic. They'd talked about this moment, the possibility that Callista might eventually reach out, might try to make amends. Cashin had warned her that his ex-wife was capable of manipulation even from prison, but something about the letter felt different. Roll. Human. Do you believe her? Cashin asked. I don't know, Sabria admitted. Part of me wants to. The part that remembers what it felt like to need forgiveness, to need a second chance. But she destroyed lives. Stole from children. Tried to have you arrested for the crime of existing while black and poor. Yeah. Sabria folded the letter carefully. I think I can forgive her. Not for her sake, but for mine. I don't want to carry that anger anymore. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean what she did was okay. Cashin reached over and took her hand, intertwining their fingers with a familiarity that still surprised her sometimes. 6 months ago, she'd been his wife's maid. Now she was the woman he'd rebuilt his entire life to be worthy of. I'm proud of you, he said quietly. For everything you've become. For choosing healing over hatred. They pulled into the community center parking lot, and Sabria saw the small crowd waiting for them. Kids from the neighborhood, some as young as 8, others teenagers who'd aged out of foster care and were trying to navigate adulthood without any safety net. Kids who reminded her of herself at their age, invisible and forgotten by the people in power. Ms. Santos. A 12-year-old girl named Maya ran up to the car as they parked. Did you really testify against rich people who were stealing money? I did, Sabria said, stepping out of the car and smoothing her simple dress. She'd learned to dress down for the community center. The kids needed to see someone who looked like them, not another authority figure in expensive clothes. And they went to prison. They did. Good, Maya said with fierce satisfaction. My mama says rich people never get in trouble for nothing. Says they got different rules. Sometimes they do, Sabria admitted, crouching down to Maya's eye level. But sometimes, if enough people are brave enough to speak up, we can make sure everyone follows the same rules. Are you going to teach us how to be brave like you? The question hit her like a punch to the chest. Brave. This child saw her as brave, when most days she still felt like that terrified 25-year-old getting dragged from a car in the rain. I'm going to teach you something better, Sabria said. I'm going to teach you how to be smart. How to understand money, how to protect yourselves, how to build the kind of life you want instead of the kind of life other people think you deserve. As they walked into the community center together, Sabria, Cashin, and 23 kids who'd been written off by almost everyone else, she felt the weight of her transformation settling into something permanent. She wasn't the victim anymore, wasn't the avenger anymore. She was something new, a bridge between worlds, a translator of privilege, a teacher who understood both poverty and power. Ms. Santos, one of the older kids, asked as they settled into their classroom, "What's the most important thing about money?" Sabria thought about Callista's letter in her purse, about the empire built on stolen charity funds, about her own journey from homeless teenager to federal witness to community advocate. The most important thing about money, she said, is understanding that it's just a tool. It's not good or evil by itself. What matters is what you do with it, and what you're willing to do to get it. The moment you decide that money is more important than other people's dignity, more important than justice, more important than treating everyone as human, that's when you lose your soul. Did the rich lady lose her soul? Maya asked. I think she forgot she had one, Sabria said gently. But the good news is, souls can be found again. People can change. People can choose to do better. As the afternoon wore on, teaching kids about budgets and bank accounts and the importance of financial literacy, Sabria felt a contentment she'd never experienced before. This wasn't the hollow victory she'd felt after Callista's arrest, or even the complicated joy of falling in love with Cashin. This was something deeper, purpose. After the kids left, she and Cashin walked through the neighborhood together, past houses that reminded her of the one where she'd grown up with Grandma Essie, past corner stores and bus stops and all the small landmarks of a working-class life. I have something to tell you, Cashin said as they paused at a red light. I got the final paperwork today. The divorce is official. Sabria felt her heart skip, though she'd been expecting this news for weeks. Still, there was something surreal about it. The legal end of his 20-year marriage, the final severing of ties to his old life. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Free," he said immediately, then paused. "And terrified. For 20 years, I knew exactly who I was supposed to be. Callista's husband. The Blackwell heir. Now I'm just Cashin. And I'm not entirely sure who that is yet." "I know who you are," Sabria said, stopping on the sidewalk and turning to face him. "You're the man who chose truth over comfort. You're the man who threw away everything he'd inherited to build something he'd earned. You're the man who shows up every morning to renovate houses for families who can't afford contractors, who volunteers at the community center on weekends, who's learning to see the world through the eyes of people he used to ignore." She reached up to touch his face, feeling the slight roughness of his beard against her palm. "You're the man I fell in love with," she said. "Not the Blackwell heir. Not Callista's husband. Just Cashin." When he kissed her, right there on the sidewalk in East Atlanta with traffic flowing around them and the afternoon sun painting everything golden, it felt like a promise. Not just of love, but of the life they were building together, a life based on truth instead of lies, justice instead of privilege, earned happiness instead of inherited ease. "So what now?" he asked when they broke apart. Sabria smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Now we keep building. Keep teaching those kids. Keep proving that people can change, that love can survive justice, that sometimes the most broken people can become the strongest. And us. Us too," she said. "We keep building us." As they walked home together through the neighborhood where she'd chosen to make her new life, Sabria thought about the letter in her purse, about the woman in federal prison who was finally learning to see her own humanity, about the kids who would grow up with the tools to protect themselves from predators like the Blackwells used to be. Change was possible. Justice was possible. Love after trauma was possible. And sometimes, if you were brave enough to fight for what was right and patient enough to wait for healing, you got to keep all three. The aftermath is as powerful as the climax. Watching Sabria transform from Avenger to healer, seeing Cashin rebuild himself from the ground up, what do you think about Callista's prison letter? Is redemption possible for everyone? One final part to go. 1 year later, Sabria stood in the backyard of the modest house she and Cashin had bought in East Atlanta, watching him teach Maya and 6 other kids from the community center how to plant a vegetable garden. The house was nothing like the Buckhead mansion she'd once cleaned. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that barely fit 2 people. But it was theirs, bought with money they'd both earned through honest work. "Ms. Santos." Maya called out, dirt streaking her cheek as she held up a tiny tomato seedling. "Look. It's already got roots." "That's because you took good care of it," Sabria called back, feeling her heart swell with pride. Maya had been one of her first students at the financial literacy program, a kid who'd started out suspicious of any adult offering help. Now she was saving half her allowance every week and had already opened her first savings account. The sound of a car in the driveway made her turn. Agent Morrison stepped out of an unmarked sedan, looking exactly the same as she had 18 months ago, average, unremarkable, but with those laser-sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Ms. Santos," Morrison said, approaching with a manila folder in her hands. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I have some news I thought you'd want to hear in person." Sabria felt her stomach tighten reflexively, though she couldn't imagine what federal business might still involve her. The Blackwell case had been closed for months, all appeals exhausted, all co-conspirators sentenced. What's going on? Morrison glanced at the kids in the garden, then at Cashin, who was walking over with concern written across his face. "It's about the foundation," Morrison said. "The Pemberton Foundation that was laundering money through the Blackwell accounts. We've recovered and redistributed over $150 million to legitimate charities across the Southeast. Money that was stolen from programs meant to help kids like—" She gestured toward the garden. "Like them." Sabria felt her knees go weak. She'd known intellectually that her testimony had helped recover stolen funds, but hearing the specific number, $150 million, was staggering. "There's more," Morrison continued, opening the folder. "The Department of Justice is creating a new whistleblower protection and reward program, partially inspired by your case. They want to name it the Santos Initiative." "They want to what?" Sabria stared at the official documents Morrison was holding out. "Your testimony didn't just convict the Blackwells," Morrison explained. "It exposed a network of financial crimes that reached from Atlanta to Miami to New York. Dozens of arrests. Hundreds of millions recovered. The DOJ wants to formalize protections for people who risk everything to expose financial crimes against charitable organizations." Cashin appeared at her side, reading over her shoulder. "The Santos Initiative for Charitable Finance Protection," he read aloud. "Jesus, Sabria. Do you realize what this means?" She was staring at the documents, but not really seeing them. In her mind, she was back in that Birmingham bus terminal, 18 months ago, counting her last $27 and wondering if she had the courage to rebuild her life. She thought about all the kids like Maya, all the families who'd been helped by money that had been stolen from them and was now being returned. "It means," she said slowly, "that other people won't have to choose between staying quiet and losing everything. It means there's finally a system to protect people who speak up." "There's one more thing," Morrison said, pulling out another document. "A reward. Federal law allows for compensation to whistleblowers whose information leads to significant recoveries. Given the scope of what your testimony uncovered." She handed Sabria a check. Sabria looked at the number and nearly dropped it. $2 million. "I can't accept this," she said immediately, trying to hand it back. "Why not?" Morrison asked, genuinely curious. "Because." Sabria looked at the kids in the garden, at Cashin beside her, at the modest house they'd made into a home. "Because I didn't do this for money. I did it because it was right." "Which is exactly why you deserve it," Morrison said firmly. "You risked everything, your safety, your future, your life, to expose crimes against some of the most vulnerable people in our society. The law says you're entitled to this compensation, and frankly, the DOJ wants to send a message that doing the right thing shouldn't have to mean sacrificing your financial security." Sabria stared at the check, then at Cashin, who was looking at her with a mixture of pride and amusement. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. "I'm thinking," Sabria said, a slow smile spreading across her face, "about how many more kids we could help with this. How many more community centers we could fund. How many more people we could teach to protect themselves from predators like the Blackwells." She looked up at Morrison. "Can I donate it? To the charities that were victims of the crimes?" Morrison smiled, the first genuinely warm expression Sabria had ever seen on the agent's face. "You can do whatever you want with it. It's yours." After Morrison left, Sabria and Cashin sat on their back porch, watching the kids tend their garden as the sun set over Atlanta. The check lay on the table between them, representing more money than either of them had ever imagined having. "Are you sure about this?" Cashin asked. "We could keep some of it. Buy a bigger house, travel, secure our future." "Our future is already secure," Sabria said, taking his hand. "We have work that matters, love that's real, a community that supports us. What more could we possibly need?" "Nothing," he said, bringing her hand to his lips. "Absolutely nothing." 2 hours later, they were inside drafting donation letters to a dozen different charities, organizations that provided housing for homeless youth, financial literacy programs for low-income families, legal aid for people who couldn't afford attorneys. By the time they finished, they distributed every penny of the reward money. "Any regrets?" Cashin asked as they sealed the last envelope. Sabria thought about the question seriously. A year ago, she'd been a woman consumed by the need for justice, driven by anger and pain and the desperate desire to prove that invisible people could become visible. Now she was someone different, not because the anger was gone, but because it had been transformed into something more powerful: purpose. "None," she said finally. "Not about the money, not about the choices we made, not about any of it. Not even about loving the enemy's husband," he teased, echoing the phrase the media had used to describe their relationship. Sabria laughed, pulling him closer on their second-hand couch in their modest living room. "Especially not that. Though technically, you're not the enemy's husband anymore. You're my husband." The proposal had happened 3 months ago, right there in the community center classroom where she taught financial literacy. No ring, no fancy dinner, just Cashin getting down on one knee in front of 20 kids and asking if she'd spend the rest of her life building something beautiful with him. She'd said yes before he'd finished the question. "Mrs. Matthews Blackwell," he said, trying out the hyphenated name they'd decided on. "Has a nice ring to it." "Just promise me something," Sabria said, curling up against his chest. "Promise me that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we'll still remember what this feels like. This moment when we have everything we need and nothing we don't want." "I promise," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Though I have a feeling we're going to be too busy changing the world to forget." Outside, Atlanta hummed with its usual energy, a city of contradictions where poverty and wealth existed side by side, where justice was sometimes delayed but not always denied, where broken people could rebuild themselves if they had enough courage and just enough hope. In her purse, Sabria still carried Callista's letter, not because she needed the reminder, but because it represented something important about forgiveness and second chances. She'd never written back, but she'd read every letter that had come since. Slowly, carefully, the woman who had once dragged her from a car in the rain was becoming someone different in prison, someone who was finally learning to see other people as human. Redemption was possible, even for the worst of them. But it had to be earned, day by day, choice by choice, through the hard work of becoming better than you were. As she fell asleep in Cashin's arms in their small house in East Atlanta, surrounded by the sounds of a neighborhood that was finally home, Sabria thought about the journey that had brought her here, from abandoned child to invisible made to force for justice to teacher and advocate and wife. The girl who'd been blamed for her mother's death had become a woman who protected other people's children. The maid who'd been humiliated by her employers had become a force that brought down corruption and changed federal law. The woman who'd thought love and justice were incompatible had discovered they were actually inseparable, that real love demanded justice, and true justice was rooted in love. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, if you were brave enough to fight for what was right and stubborn enough to believe in change and patient enough to wait for healing, you got the life you'd always deserved but never dared to dream you could have. In the morning, there would be more kids to teach, more letters to write, more work to do building the kind of world where everyone was seen, everyone was heard, and everyone had the chance to become who they were meant to be. But tonight, there was peace. There was love. There was the quiet satisfaction of a mission completed and a life well lived. And that was more than enough. What an incredible journey from victim to victor to healer. From a woman dragged from a car in humiliation to someone who changes federal law and builds a life of purpose and love. What part of Sabria's transformation inspired you most? Share your thoughts on this powerful story of justice, redemption, and the courage to rebuild your entire world.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you love this story, you will surely enjoy the next one. It's crazier and more intriguing than you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.